Hey, this is another video by Petrock, and today I'm working on my 03 Dodge Durango 4x4, and I'm going to be replacing the intermediate steering shaft. It's actually a fairly simple job. There's only 2 bolts to remove. The only real difficulty in this job is if the bolts are severely rusted. There's only one way to install this thing, so you can't install it upside down, you can't install it backwards. So the first thing you want to do is you want to jack up the truck, put it on jack stands, make sure it's nice and secure, make sure to chock the rear wheels so that the car doesn't roll. You want both front wheels off the ground because you're going to need to turn the steering wheel in order to gain access to the bolts from underneath the car. I've seen some other videos where people have cut out little sections of plastic in here to gain access to the bolt that's at the top. To me, that's way overkill. The bolts are easily accessible from underneath. The only tool you need is a 1/2-inch socket and a couple extensions. It's a good idea, especially if your truck is really rusty, to wear some eye protection, because while you're underneath the car, you're going to be moving stuff around and you don't want to get any rust in your eye. It's really painful. So I have my jack stand set up on the frame rail, right about there, on both sides. I also have the driver's side tire off the car, and I always put it underneath just in case when the jack stands fails, the truck's going to land on the tire, not on me. Okay, there's the brake master cylinder, and in relation to that, right there is your intermediate steering shaft. That's the lower coupling. The upper coupling is right about there, underneath the brake booster. So it's a good idea to hit the bolts, one of which is right there. The other is right there with some penetrating oil. These tend to rust up, especially if you're in the rust belt. So it's a good idea to hit them with some penetrating oil in order to make removal simpler. Also try to get it here where the shaft coming out of the firewall goes into the coupler. This also tends to rust up. If you can free it up with some penetrating oil, it'll make your life a little bit easier. So now we move into the cab of the truck. You take your key, you stick it into the ignition, you click it forward 2 clicks, wait for all the lights to turn off and all the beeping. And now you can rotate your steering wheel left and right and rotate that shaft in order to get it in the location that you want. Okay, now that the bolt is pointing in your direction, you can snake your extension up between the floorboards and the O2 sensor and remove the bolt. This is hard to film with one hand and turn the wrench with the other. Bolts undone. Now you need to lock the steering wheel back down. This can be done with an automatic by just removing the key, but as a secondary safety precaution, I like to run the seat belt through the steering wheel. Basically something like that. The reason being is you don't want the steering wheel to move, otherwise it's going to be difficult to get the new steering shaft in. The steering rack and the steering shaft are currently lined up. You don't want to lose that positioning. Additionally, you don't want the steering wheel to spin, otherwise it can possibly damage the clock spring inside the steering wheel and do things like make the airbag not deploy, throw a couple trouble codes probably, and make the controls on the steering wheel stop working. So now that the steering wheel is secure, we're going to go back underneath the car. Okay, now that you got both bolts undone, snake a pry bar up in between and pry it off. This part right here will telescope and collapse in on itself, allowing it to do this. Now that the lower part of the shaft is disconnected, now I can move to the top. Again, you do the same thing, just take a pry bar and pry down on it. Be careful because it may drop suddenly. You don't want it to fall on your face. Because of that, I'm not going to do this on camera because I don't want this thing hitting me in the face. And I only have one hand to work with when I'm holding the camera. So I'll be right back. Okay, so here's the old and the new part. This is a Dorman part number 425-257. They just call it a steering shaft. Now the old one looks like a little bit thicker than the new one, at least in the joints. But that's probably because this is probably aluminum and I think this is steel. The rag joint also appears to be a little bit slimmed down compared to the old one. I'm not sure whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's a different design. The other part is that on the old one, the telescoping end was right here, and on the new one, it's on this side. I'm not sure whether I like that or not, because the open end or the sliding end is on the top, which means water can get down in here and then we'll get trapped because of this worm gear clamp. I might put a zip tie on this just to give a little bit added protection against the elements, because this is pretty loose, as you can see. Other than that, it looks pretty good. So before installing it, just to make your life a little bit easier, you might want to take a little bit of anti-seize and put a little bit in the hole on both sides. This will serve two purposes. One is it'll help with installation, making the part slide on a little bit easier. And it'll also help prevent rust from forming, making it easier to remove later on if you ever have to, for example, replace this shaft or replace the steering rack. So now we need to snake our arm and this new steering shaft up back into position. Don't worry, it only goes on one way. If you notice, there's a little notch on the right side of the stud. This is where the bolt goes through, so it can only go on one way. So again, because it's tight space and I only have myself filming, I'm going to do this off camera and I'll be right back. So there, I've got the top bracket in. So to prevent the top joint from falling out while you're trying to install the bottom one, just slide the bolt in through the top. You don't have to screw it in, just have it slid in and that'll hold it in place through the notch that's in the shaft. Now to move on to the bottom. Again, one arm, not a lot of space. Gonna do this off camera. Okay, I have the shaft in place. Hopefully the lighting isn't too bad because all I have is a single drop light. So now, as you can see, the threaded side of the joint is facing us. That's different than the stock shaft. So we have to rotate the steering wheel again in order to get the bolt holes to line up and face us so we can get a socket on it. So go back into the cab and release the seatbelt and put the key back in the ignition and release the steering wheel so we can turn the shaft. So now you just screw in the top bolt and then screw in the bottom bolt. Now what I didn't show on the top bolt was that I coated the bolt with a little bit of anti-seize, again, so that it's easier to remove if I ever have to do so later. You should do the same thing for the bottom bolt. Okay, now that you got the top bolt and the bottom bolt screwed in all the way by hand, now you torque them both down to 42 foot-pounds. Again, can't do it on camera, need to do it off. Okay, so it's all in. So the only thing I'm not happy about is this boot right here. If you notice, the boot doesn't go all the way up. It's supposed to join up with the top of the shaft and go into little notches right here. However, mine, I guess, is worn or I don't know what, but it doesn't want to hold. So I'm going to put a zip tie around it to hold it in place. So I switched over to a worm gear instead of a zip tie because the zip tie just wasn't holding right. So contrary to popular belief, this joint right here doesn't actually move once the shaft is installed. It doesn't move with the suspension. It's not anything like that. It's only there to help with installation and to help in an accident. For example, it'll telescope inward a little bit before pushing the shaft into the steering wheel into your chest. But other than that, it doesn't move. So tying this down is perfectly fine. This boot's not going to rip, it's not going to move, it's not going to do anything. So that's pretty much it. I hope this video helped you out. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please leave them in the comments section below. If you like this video, please click the thumbs up button. If you want to see more videos like it, please subscribe.